It is January 19th, and I have finished both read and watched a version of Much Ado About Nothing by William Shakespeare. Much Ado About Nothing is interesting in the Shakespearean works because it really is one of the last comedies, like pure comedies, that he really writes. Because this and Twelfth Night, which are comedies, comedy in a very loose term is just that there's a happy ending for most, if not all, of the characters. So this is Twelfth Night that are really kind of his last true comedies, and then his final works are really kind of problematic comedies in which it's really meant to leave the audience going, well, wait, what? Not all this is resolved. And Shakespeare likes to do that a lot in his works. There's some sort of unresolved thing that we're going to worry about some other time, and let's just go party and have fun right now. And I think that the more has to do with the time that he is writing in and producing works for, is this the public theater becoming, even arguably in his lifetime, a fairly recent thing that has become accepted by the crown just within 100 years of his birth, I believe that's the case, right? And so part of the role of the theater is you have to entertain and please the crowd, even if it's not what you want. So this is sort of, I truly believe that in a lot of Shakespeare's works, especially when you look at the comedies, you see a lot of the elements of tragedies in them because he wanted to write tragedies, but you have to write comedies because that's what earns money, that's what makes money. But that's all conjecture and nothing I can really prove, other than this is what I see throughout his works and whatnot. Other points on Much Ado About Nothing. This is also, well, I should say, on the overall plot of the play, right? Your villain, Don Juan, is evil because he's evil. Like that's the idea put forth by Don John himself. I believe in Act 1, Scene 3, he proposed that himself as, I'm evil because I'm evil. I'm a villain because I'm a villain. Which, I mean, fair enough, I guess. But really, if you, I think, take a step back, right? In the time and place, you have the prince, who is Don Pedro, who has been given everything and lives a life of luxury and everything. Don John has some aspect of that, but John is also a bastard son, and therefore has no rights, no claims to anything in the future. So there's going to be a resentment there in some way, and if you can ruin Don Pedro's life and his older brother's life, then so be it. That is, of course, looking beyond the text of what is written there, but I think that there's an argument there that can be made. Story itself, Hero and Claudio are going to get married. All's well. Don John decides to interfere. One of his henchmen woos one of the maids of Hero, but dresses the maid up to look like Hero. Don John gets Don Pedro and Claudio, brings him to the scene, looks in a window to see this horrible, disgusting man dishonoring what appears to be a hero. And then at the marriage in Act 3, Act 4, Act 4. In the marriage in Act 4, Claudio publicly disparages Hero. Hero is presumed to be dead. Then they pretend to go along with the death because Hero's not actually dead. She just looks like it, which then brings forth this whole light. And then eventually the fools find out the plot because they arrested Baracchio, and then everything's resolved. Everything's a good time. What's really interesting to me is within the plot of the play is that you have Hero and you have Claudio, who in like all of the scenes, they only speak to each other in like 3 scenes. Like they're in quite a few scenes together, and especially the one that I watched, they're not always required to be on stage together, I should say. But it's nice to put them in there sometimes, even when the stage directors don't necessarily say it. But when you actually look at it, they only speak to each other in like 3 scenes. But the entire plot of this and the entire arc of the story and what the story is revolves around what's happening to them. Everything in the world is happening to them, and they have nothing to say about it, and they don't even talk to each other, except for when they meet, when they're getting married, and then when they get married the second time. That's it, which is a fascinating little detail that I think really, when you look at this and you're asking yourself questions about these characters, it goes a really long way to show that these characters, specifically Hero and specifically Claudio, are really, really young, mentally, in our modern age. Myself and the people I'm taking this class with, this was read for Shakespeare, my Shakespeare class, by the way, tend to view them as kind of late teens, probably 17 or 18, but in reality, they're probably 14 to 15, which you don't think that there's a huge gap there between 15 and 18, but there is. It's a gigantic gap. That's that. And then on the other side, you have Benedick and Beatrice. Benedick and Beatrice, as in the story itself, nothing happens to them. If you remove them from the story, it doesn't change a whole lot. And yet they have everything to say about it. They talk so damn much, because even though that this play and what is the actual arc of the story revolves around Hero and Claudio, they are not inherently the main characters, not the characters that we care about. We care about Benedick and we care about Beatrice. Benedick and Beatrice go on to really inspire, I think, a lot of what we consider modern rom-coms, and even to a further extent, this idea of 2 people that are butting heads so much because they haven't gotten over each other, is such a ubiquitous thing that happens in literature now, that can really trace its roots back to this play, which is really interesting. I believe that there's kind of an instance before this that's recorded, but in terms of really popularizing these characters and this kind of character archetype, which is what rom-coms have been for the past 20 years or whatever, I think it really kind of comes back to this. Yeah, right. Another thing on the play itself is this constant theme of appetite and hunger being stuffed, and it's used mostly between Benedick and Beatrice. And we start off with Beatrice saying that Benedick is effectively so full of himself and is stuffed with all these morals that aren't good, and that he has a ginormous appetite for things, which really just that he just devours everything that's in his path because he just can't get enough of himself. And that's the thing that comes up again and again and again, is this idea of appetite or hunger or being stuffed. Later on, Act 4, maybe at late Act 3, we get to this scene in which they're preparing for the wedding, and it is Hero and Margaret getting ready together, and then Beatrice walks in, and it says that she's ill and that she is stuffed, which then goes back to this thing that we hadn't seen for an act and a half of this whole thing of appetite, hunger, and being stuffed, and all those sorts of words relate back to this relationship between Benedick and Beatrice. And it's using stuffed in a different way here, because beforehand it had all been about appetite and talking about Benedick's appetite. But then we get to this scene and all of a sudden it's about Beatrice being stuffed from illness. But it harkens back to that same thing, that dual meaning of the word stuff that has been carrying throughout the entire play. It also goes along with Beatrice's character, because Beatrice, in the barbs and the jabs that are made back and forth between Beatrice and any other character, is she tends to take the words very literally and then change them into a very literal meaning into the next jab, right? That's what her character does. So it makes sense that her character then, at the scene in which they're finally getting to the point of where they're being willing to confess love for each other, is that she is physically stuffed instead of this metaphorical stuffed that has been talked about with Benedick's entire time up to that point. This play and all of Shakespeare's works are very dependent on the actors and the directors, because if your director and your actors are not good, you're gonna have a shit show, because Shakespeare is hard to read, it is hard to listen to, and if you don't have actors that can present it really, really well, or if you don't have directors that know what they're looking at and then can piece it apart for the actors so that they can do their roles, you're gonna end up with something very, very wooden and boring and not approachable, which is why so many of us don't like Shakespeare, me included. I really don't like Shakespeare all that much. But if you have good actors and you have a good director, it turns out really, really well and really, really fun. I watched the Catherine Tate and David Tennant. They play Benedick and Beatrice and Benedick, respectively. And it's a fantastic version because of two things. One, because of the added stage directions and stage management that is being done that is not written in the play. And then two, because they were willing to make it fun. I think when you're looking at Shakespeare a lot, a lot of times what happens, and myself included, is that we want to look at this as what would we perform it during the period, which then makes it inherently because there's not a lot of props. You're doing theater in the round, which, although can be very interesting, requires really good actors. And if you're doing this at a high school level, even at times a collegiate level, that's just not fun. It's not enjoyable for people. Theater's supposed to be fun. Theater's supposed to be enjoyable. Theater's supposed to be an interaction between what is being said, what is being done, and what the audience is doing. It's a three-piece puzzle that's going on there. And if you just go straight from the book and nothing else, you're gonna end up with a really terrible play. And honestly, that's one of the reasons why I don't like Shakespeare all that much, because of this ongoing thing in which we read it and we say it's good because everyone else has read it and said it's good. And what you're taking out of it is it takes a group of legitimately really special people, or even just a few very, very special people and very gifted people, to make it enjoyable and accessible for a modern audience, right? And you have to be willing to take risks with it. And that's, to me, that's really why I don't necessarily like Shakespeare all that much. It's because we continue to do it because we say that it's good, but really what we're looking at, what's good, is the people who are directing it and the people that are acting, not inherently the plays, right? Things like, I was watching the Catherine Tate, David Tennant version. Along with that, I was watching a more traditionally played form of it. And what I was doing would watch the more traditional version, read it again, and then watch the Catherine Tate, David Tennant version. And really what that was showing was this entire dichotomy of things that were not funny the first two times were suddenly really funny the third time, because of who was doing the action and what the action was staged like, right? And it was all, even though we all read the same thing, it's entirely dependent on what a director and what actors are willing to put forward and how far they're willing to bend it, which certainly, I think, certainly detracts from Shakespeare. But also in some ways it really benefits Shakespeare, because you can constantly update this and update this and update this and change it and change it and change it and do a whole lot of things with it. Some may say that's a bastardization of Shakespeare, but I say that's great. I love it, because if we only keep with tradition, then what the fuck are we doing, right? So that's that. Much ado about nothing. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this comes down to it being kind of a nothing play, I think. It introduces two... My cat has asthma. I don't know if I've ever mentioned that. It comes down to really creating the archetype for the two lovers that hate each other, while also, pulling things from Hero and Leander, which I've also read most of at this point, or, plays and poems and history that was beforehand, all kind of lead into this. So yeah, that's much my thoughts on Much Ado About Nothing. Numerically, I don't know. It's hard, right? Because certainly if you perform this well, it's going to be really, really great. But if you just read this, or if you don't have that opportunity, it's a very meh thing. 5, I guess, if you're watching the Catherine Tate David Tennant version. 8 if you're watching a lot of other versions. 3, so 5, I guess.